The General Industries Workers Union of South Africa has expressed outrage at the deaths of two women in Limpopo. Now, it's believed they were shot and killed and subsequently fed to pigs. This incident has resuscitated the ongoing conversation of hunger, as well as the women who were accompanied by a man who were believed to be looking for soon-to-be expired food at the farm. Now, let's discuss this further. GIWUSA President Mametlwe Sebei joins us live now. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. I mean, this incident has left many people shocked, angry, about what has happened here, but you are also demanding justice for the victims and their families.
We all are. I mean, this was a horrific murder that is certainly racially motivated, because just the circumstances of it, and both in terms of shooting of people that clearly were desperate, scavenging food, but also disposing of their body in a manner that actually treated them like a garbage, a waste to be fed pigs, is the ultimate insult and dehumanization that can happen to anybody. And I think that it's happening 30 years into a black majority democratic rule should be a cause for all of us to reflect. But also, and most importantly, that our people have to be scavenging for food, not only at the risk of their own lives, but also their own health. In the most industrialized country in the African continent, which is producing a massive surplus of food, that should also be a cause for reflection, and we say is a cruel indictment on the system of white monopoly, capitalism, and of course, its racism in the farming industry. But it's also an indictment on the entire system of capitalism, because that the food is monopolized by industries that prefer to waste and to, of course, throw it away in the midst of starvation. It should be a cause for all of us to reflect and say, what type of society is this?
And I'm going to get to, some of the cases that we've seen in the past. But as a union, for example, what is your experience when it comes to on the ground? Of course, some say that these incidents that we see that are being reported on are literally just scratching the surface. There are more that go, unheard of, and nobody gets to report on them. So do you hear of some of these horrific incidences on the ground as a union?
Okay. The farming industry is certainly colonial, and there is very few indications of transformation in terms of the relationships in the farms. I'm from Limpopo. I can tell you that this is far from exception. But there are many stories also coming out of Western Cape and many other farming areas. I'm a human rights lawyer. I can tell you that in Northern Cape, where we used to have an Office of Lawyers for Human Rights, there are regular reports just of the brutality of racism in those particular farming areas meted by white farmers against black workers, shows just how treacherous the betrayal that has happened in 1994, which has left, obviously, the private ownership and the monopoly of this ownership by the very same wide commercial farming interests that are allowed to continue a system of black slavery in the farms in a complete and flagrant disregard for their rights. For me, I think is something that needs to be dealt with, and that's the reason we say there's got to be discussion about what we do about the inequalities, what we do about the racism that is continuing, but most importantly, how do we actively campaign to combat racism in the farms, but also across society, because this is merely a symptom of what is actually happening. The black lives simply do not matter. And the fact that people think they can kill people, dispose of their bodies in a manner that it has happened with impunity, for us is an indictment, a criminal indictment against the government and the system that it represents.
What allows it to continue? And I ask this because, Mametlwe, at some point, we saw the coffin case, for example, and 30 years into our democracy, we're still seeing what some people are calling the power imbalance between the employer and the employee, the fight for better wages, the fight for better working conditions in some of, the farms in some of the cases. But also, how do we ensure that this doesn't just remain a conversation or stories, but it gets reported on, but also there's meaningful change on the ground?
The reality, Bungu, is that you can't have capitalism without racism, because racism is functional, a regime of capital accumulation that rests in a country like ours. When you are dealing with colonial capitalism, it rests on an exploitation of a colonial conquered people who were dispossessed of their land and stripped of every dignity in order to justify a regime of super exploitation that actually entail a colonial slavery of the black working class. So this case is but a manifestation of it. But even if you have to remove the white farmers, right, out of the picture, look what's happening in the mines. Look what's happening in the manufacturing industry. Even on the broader scale, we've got to be asking ourselves, how is it normal that in a country where basically 10 million tons of food goes to waste every year, and to put that into perspective, that is 60 billion worth of food is being wasted at the same time as 14 million people are going to bed hungry every day in this country, the most industrialized in the continent. That tells you that it's not about shortage of food. It's not about, a lack of means of producing the food to meet the needs of the people. It's about a system that, is structured around a production for profit, not production to meet the needs of the working class people and so on. And that is true of the levels of exploitation that are happening at workplaces, the racism that it requires, but also in terms of just distribution of the goods and services that force people to be starving and scavenging on the dumping side for food at the same time as the big corporate monopolies are throwing food in waste because they can't sell them to people that they exploit and pay poverty and colonial wages, and because those people can't afford it and therefore they need profit.
So, Mametlwe, how then do we begin to remedy that? And I ask it because, as you say, sometimes there isn't an appetite to then share this particular food, but should there be a way in which it is done and coordinated to ensure that this food does not go to waste, but it gets then distributed to a number of people who are in need on a daily basis?
Firstly, let's be clear about it. As I've said, you can't have capitalism without racism. So the struggle to abolish racism in South Africa and across the world is a struggle really against capitalism itself. And that's the reason, as GIWUSA have said, you need revolution in this country, you need socialism. That's a starting point. But secondly, let's talk about the immediate measures. What do you need? You need to be able to ensure that we bring into public ownership through nationalization the key monopolies, corporate monopolies across the entire food supply chains. Because when you look at the amount of waste, right, 30 to 40% of it take place within the farming and agricultural produce sector, where farmers would rather throw the food than, of course, feed their own workers and feed neighboring communities because they're in it. That is food production for profit. The 20 to 30% of the other waste is done at level of food manufacturing and processing as well. And when you look at the remainder, there is 15 and 10%, 5 and 10% that is happening at consumption level. It is because of the vast inequalities in this country. Because I can tell you, if you piece through the statistics, you'll find the usual suspects. That is, people that are hoarding and wasting food will be the rich that are owning the economy and the tops of, the rich or privileged layers of the middle classes that they lavish with wealth in order to manage their systems at corporate and at government level and so on. At the same time as 14 million people are going home and sleeping. But it also speak to broader issues as well, right? About the ownership of the land in this country. That food production is an exclusive monopoly of the big corporate commercial farming that is happening. And that is because we have not addressed the land question. We need to be able to expropriate more land if not every of these big monopolies in the agricultural sector, so that we redistribute the land, so that we place these farms under a democratic control and management of the workers that work in this, to break the power relations that also fuel racism in the farms, at the same time as we redistribute the land in such a way that we broaden the production of food, as well as ensuring an equitable distribution. At the same time, of course, we need to address other issues.
Yeah.
We are saying that we need universal basic income grant to ensure that at least everybody receives an income that guarantees them at a level of an upper bound of food poverty line. There should be nobody who scavenge for food in a country like ours, where there is more than enough and where we can show that these issues are addressed.
All right. Mametlwe, thank you so much for your time. They appreciate it. That was GIWUSA President Mametlwe Sebei. They're talking about this ongoing story, of course, as we saw the killing of 2 women there in Limpopo, allegedly, of course, being shot and killed today and subsequently fed to the pigs. But